Good
You're all set, Mr.
afternoon.
Chair.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This is the meeting of the Madaket Area Plan Work Group. And this is our January session. And I'm pleased to say that we have a quorum, so I am going to call the meeting to order, and we'll have a bit of a roll call just to verify. Lars?
Present.
Thank you. Leslie Forbes, I see an empty screen. We'll wait till she gets back.
I'm here.
Michael Maynard,
Present.
thank you. Ethan Devine,
Present.
thank you. Tom Erickson,
I'm here.
good. Peter Haffner,
Here.
thank you. David Madigan, not here. JP Hernandez, JP, no. Joe Topham,
Here.
yes, of course. And Kitty,
Here.
thank you. Oh, Leslie, you're here, thank you.
I am.
Okay,
Taking
we
notes.
have a quorum, which is a good thing. And first order of business after the establishment of the quorum is the reading of a statement for a remotely conducted open meeting. And since we have no public attendees that I can see, I'm going to go with the short version that has been approved and used in other work groups. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Madaket Area Plan Work Group meeting. Oh, and I see JP just tuned in. Good. This open meeting of the Madaket Area Plan Work Group is being conducted in a hybrid format. Actually, it's being conducted in just a Zoom format. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and will be available for viewing on the town's YouTube channel. The chair has conducted a roll call for attendance, and we have a quorum. Zoom participants are asked to identify themselves when they speak. Your name will be noted on the screen under your Zoom connection. And I think we have that perfectly worked out. And of course, we all know that town committee is done. For public comment, after the members have spoken about a subject, the chair will afford public comment to members of the public. Members of the public making comments are to announce their name and affiliation. And we have conducted the roll call. So that's a good thing. The first order of business after the statement is the approval of the agenda, which you all have. Is there any comment about the agenda? Seeing none, I will rule that the agenda is accepted. The next item is public comment for items not on the agenda. And since there are no public attendees, we can close that item. Last month in December, we did have a visitor, Sarah Henderson of 341 Madaket Road, who was concerned about the project going forward on Pops Lane, and we directed her to the appropriate town committees for her to voice her concerns. So the next item is the approval of the minutes from our last session, which was the 8th of November, 2024. I sent out those minutes. Does anyone have any corrections or comments? Very good. Seeing none, we'll move on. The first item on the agenda at this point in time is a discussion about Chapter 5, Natural and Cultural Resources, which is chaired by Peter. And first, let me say that Peter has been asking for some feedback from quite a few months. And I think only one or two folks have bothered to provide comments here and there. And I would encourage you all to take a look at it so that Peter can move on from his place of being stuck to a refinement of the chapter, and the members can kick in. I've uploaded 9 files about this chapter or issues that flow into this chapter on the Google Drive, and it's in the folder, and I encourage you all to take a look at it. Is there any discussion or points that we should make about the work we've done so far on natural and cultural resources? Kitty, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kitty Potchman. I have a question for Peter. Is there anything specific that you'd like us to review? I know I had some input early on, but I haven't dug into it recently.
I just want to make sure that everyone's had a chance to look at it and comment on it. There are a couple of spots where my comment was something like, I have no idea what to write in this section. Please, someone else who's familiar with it, weigh in and write something. There might have been a couple of places where I sensed we might not all be in agreement on a particular issue, and I was looking for, you know, the other view to try to capture both sides of an issue if it deserved, you know, being expressed that way. But mostly I just want people to, even I looked and I have no comment is all I'm looking for, so that I know we can go to whatever the next step is.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to take a moment and go down the list of subjects that have been recommended to be included in the chapter on natural and cultural resources that we compiled over the years. And matter of fact, I sent this out to everyone about a year ago. One item is a listing of inventory, conservation, open space properties, historic properties, Native American sites, beaches, piers, fire station, the Admiralty, etc. So if any of you have some input about this and some ideas, just to feed it into the chapter document, other people can move forward on it. And I've been a little reluctant to dump more files into the chapter until we got comfortable with the process. Just yesterday, there was, and Tuesday, there was an item being addressed by the HDC and the Concom for 36 and 34 Tennessee Avenue, where the new owner and developer plans to take the 2 wings on 36 Tennessee and destroy them and relocate the existing center section onto 34 Tennessee and somehow convert it into a garage, because it's a residential property right now. And on a historic basis, when you look at the GIS, there are a couple of themes that you can extract and overlay onto the map of Madaket. One of them is an historic theme, and it places red triangles on the sites, on the properties that have been essentially surveyed for having a characteristic in keeping with the requirements for national heritage and things of that nature. And Holly Backus, of course, is our historic planner for Nantucket. So I wrote to her and asked about this. And the application from the developer said, oh, this property was built in 1975, so that misses the threshold for being an historic property. But when you look into the details of when that property was originally built, it was 1938. So it clearly would qualify for that designation. Now, that's probably a little too deep in the weeds for what we want to say, but we can certainly, for example, make reference to this process. And that was just one idea that popped into my mind when we were doing this, but we've got a fire station. There are beaches and piers that are designated for emergency access and public access, things of that nature. And certainly there's a long list of conservation and open space properties from at least 5 organizations that have dedicated their purpose to conservation and open space. So I think that's important information to feed into that document, chapter 5 in the Google Drive, or to share it with Peter. Maybe he thinks it's better off in, for example, land use or something like that. Water quality, an issue that was brought up as potentially being in natural and cultural resources. And of course, Madaket has groundwater and surface water and saltwater issues. TDML for nitrogen. Should we take in this area plan, for example, a position on reducing or eliminating the fertilizers that contribute to the nitrogen load and flow actually into Long Pond, into Madaket Harbor, and unfortunately into some of the groundwater that flows to the folks that still have drinking water wells? A position on the mining of the landfill. This is very complicated.
Hey, Bruce,
The landfill.
Peter's trying to get a word in edgewise. I don't know if you saw him.
Say again?
I've got my hand raised, Bruce.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
That's okay. I think this is one of the issues. I mean, we can go through all the stuff that could or couldn't go into these different chapters, but I think one of the issues is that there's not a clear demarcation between one section and another. What you just talked about on Tennessee Ave, I wouldn't have put into chapter 5. I would have thought land use or something, unless I'm missing the point that you're trying to make. But I think I think it may be helpful, let me just say this, for you as the leader of the group to say, this should go in this chapter. And then once it's in, we can talk about it, edit it, comment on it. My concern is that we're not moving ahead with what we're trying to do without a little bit of direction. Because to make the comment about Tennessee Ave and say, Peter might want to know about it or might want to include it, like, I don't know, maybe I do, maybe I don't. Depends where we think it belongs. So it might be, let me just say this for my sections. It would be helpful to get your comment on my chapters to say it's fine as is, or to say let's add this issue into your chapter because it's not in any of the others.
I think that's an interesting point, and Michael actually brought it up in the document he put out, where he noticed that some of these issues could actually fit into more than one chapter. And the reason I just mentioned that Tennessee Avenue was because one of the categories that was supposed to be included in this chapter are Madaket's historic properties. And this is one of them. So, and it's a recent issue and it's still ongoing. So I understand what you're saying, and I can start doing that, if you don't mind, a flood of information.
Well, yeah, a flood of information wouldn't be helpful.
Okay.
A little bit of information might be. I mean, but the historic homes is another issue. That's in my section.
Right.
But the woman you referenced, I tried to get a hold of her and couldn't, because I know nothing about historical buildings in Madaket. Don't even know what the definition is to know whether it's something that we need to worry about.
Well, I'll try to get you the information. Holly is kind of overwhelmed by staff shortages, and she's been assigned more work than her role as historic planner. She's involved heavily with the HDC, the Concom, and some other things. And I understand her ability to get back on emails. It's not really a high priority, but I'll try to push that, Peter. Thank you for bringing it up.
Or ask her if she'd take a call from me and if that's easier for her. I can cover the issues that pretty quick.
Clearly, if you just go on the town GIS and over on the right side, there are themes that you can select. You can select a photo of Madaket or anything from various dates. There's another theme for historic properties, which is very interesting. That's the one that places the red triangles on them. So that's a start. And I will try to get Holly to respond. Peter, did you copy me on the email you sent to her? I don't
It was
remember.
I can look it up. It was months ago. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
it was. I don't recall, but if you send it to me, I'll try to pursue it a little bit.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can I just say something? So the Plus Department has just hired 2 new people, possibly 3. And then there's been a little bit of a transition in interviewing for Leslie Snell's former position. So there's been a little bit of restructuring and reorganization as far as that goes and interviewing. But I do think that Holly, and you can CC me as well, Peter. And
Okay.
then if we don't hear anything, I can go in and sit at our desk and say. But the other part of it is she is, like Bruce said, she is involved with the HCC. She's on the historical commission. They're starting a scanning of the streets and all this other stuff. So she's got a couple little things going on. But now that the staff members are in place and getting up to speed, so I think she should be better at or responding quicker to our correspondence.
Okay.
Thanks for the update. It's very interesting. But she's a valuable asset to these committees. And I think she could help us too. And I think she's willing to from the conversation or emails I had just about this 36 Tennessee issue, where she basically said, it's tough for me to respond in just 2 days because that's the time frame between you see the agenda and the meeting actually happens. So you really have to scramble. So I understand that, but point well taken, Peter. I wrote down to try to address this soon after this meeting. And the other, I just want to go over real quick the other issues that should be in this chapter according to what the information we've been fed. Water quality, position on reminding the landfill, the unlined cell, and the PFAS that are in it. A position on containing wastewater from the landfill on its property because they have been, in my view, falsely accused of letting wastewater funnel into Long Pond. And I've been there and I've seen how they control it. And I don't think they're intentionally doing what they've been, I'd say, accused of. Sea level rise issues, erosion, controlling invasive species is an issue that probably belongs in there, or land use, or both. A good issue is the common hedge bushes that people develop and they sculpt. They're listed as an invasive species and non-inherent to Nantucket. But that's just an example. Preserving rare and endangered species habitat. I think, Kitty, you could help with some of that. And the viewscapes, we mentioned that a year ago, and we put a hyphen there and said, example, offshore wind turbines. Well, that has become a reality now. And of course, the position on dark skies and reducing light pollution. So those are the topics that the powers that be that develop these master plans and then devote them down to the various neighborhoods. That was a list that we got more than a year ago, and I wanted to share that with you in case you had some ideas that Peter might not have touched upon yet. And it would be helpful just one sentence, 2 sentence thought that we can be developing. Does anybody else want to say anything about chapter 5? Peter?
Quick comment. I think much of what you just read out is in there, maybe not in the detail that we're looking for, but at least it's in there structurally. Is that a list that you can send me so I can do a little better cross-reference to make sure that these issues are fully covered?
I will send it to you.
Thanks.
Let's see. Okay. Noted the file name, and I can get that. If no one has any other comments about chapter 5, we can now move on and harp on Peter once again for his work on services and facilities.
Bruce, I have a
Which
quick thing
I've
on
uploaded.
5 that's also relevant for 7.
Say
In terms
again?
of a quick thing, in terms of comments, I didn't want to necessarily write directly in the Google Doc and make it messier. What's the preferred means of providing comments?
Say again, I didn't understand what you said, Nate.
How would you like to receive comments?
Oh, I see. Thank you. Good idea. One way is to go on the Google Drive, click on the file for chapter 5, for example, and in that folder, there are files. And as I mentioned, there are 9 files. One of them, actually 2 of them, are Peter's work, where he gave us a file several months ago, and then he updated it with a new file. If you open that file, you can treat it as a Word document or as a Google document, and you can insert comments under track changes or something like that, where you click on where you want to make a comment, make sure you put your initials down, choose a color font that's different than some of the other folks are using, make your comment, and just close out. Don't delete anything, don't cross anything out. The Google Drive is very sensitive to being abused and ruined by people going in and deleting files, which is why I have only allowed our members to be editors. The other categories is reader, you can read it, but that's it. And then there's a comment status where you can make a comment, but you can't edit, like recommend a cross out or things like that. You all are designated as editors. So you have the most ability. Peter?
Ethan, if it's too messy, which it tends to be, you could put a separate doc with your name on it, and just call it comments, and I can cut and paste as need be.
I mean, it's fine for me. I just noticed most of the comments are yours,
Yeah.
and they're on the right.
And most of them are edits for format,
Right.
which is why it's really messy.
Sure.
One thought is to start all over with just save it as is and start all over. If it's easy enough for you to comment in the document, that works for me too.
As long as that's okay for you. I just didn't want it to make it any harder for you to navigate.
Yeah, because no, that's fine.
Okay.
Thanks.
So correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think it would be okay, and it wouldn't violate open meeting law if Ethan were to simply, if he wanted to, send an email with his comments just to Peter. Don't make any decisions, don't make any accusations or things like that, but just state, hey, I think that these issues need to be studied, or these are my ideas.
So yes, that is correct. You could do that. The other thing I think we talked about earlier on in our organization of setting this all up, I think that if someone said, listen, next Friday we're going to meet, can everyone review this of that group, have your comments ready, and say, Peter's in charge. Everyone says the comments to Peter, and then set up a Zoom link, and you 4 have, or 5, whatever there's in the group, have a Zoom meeting, quickly get to discussion, because I think a lot of emails being traded back and forth would be a problem. Then Peter can, or someone can upload that into the document, so there's not a lot of messiness It would also, I think the interaction would be a better conversation to work. And all someone has to do is write a quick, we spoke for an hour and these were the highlights and this is what we did. And this document supports that. And then that document is brought in and it's not wasting a lot of time. And then, say next month, they had a meeting and now he comes in and Peter says, we had a conversation and we updated this, and this is with the changes. So that's how we can kind of expedite and move things a little bit quicker, is having more updates on these meetings and sidebar Zoom meetings as a group separately. But it's all comes down to just letting, as we said, we can use our personal Zooms. We just have to have minutes and then save those minutes within a file. So,
Peter, if that would be helpful, for 5, I'd be happy to hop on a Zoom and I can take the minutes or, whatever would help wrap this up.
That would,
Sure, I think it may be, maybe, again, I'm not sure if I can do this. Bruce, send out a note to everyone, just say, here's the time that we're going to try to move this whole chapter 5 business off the table. So everyone that has comments should jump on.
well, Peter, sorry to you, Mr. Chair, but if you are the chair of that group, then you can send out an email and say,
Okay.
these dates work in this time. And then, okay, this is everything works and everything's aligned. Here's a Zoom link, we'll all talk then.
Okay.
And that could be for every group and any group to kind of work that. And I would just CC Bruce so he knows what's going on. So if anyone else wants to have a meeting on that certain time, he's like, well, group 5's talking about this and we might want to look at a different time. So.
Okay. So then, Bruce, I would only say before that happens, I think I really need your input on chapter 5, because we're going to wrap it up. We have to know what you think first as
I
our
will do that.
fearless leader. Yep.
That comment actually gets a little darn.
Hey, Bruce, Mr. Chairman, can I chime in for a sec?
Say again.
Can I chime in for a second?
Of
Please.
course, go ahead.
I think when we set this all up, I know I've done some work on, I think it's chapter 8, but I think we already have assigned subgroups. So I think we're on the right topic here. Like chapter 5, I don't remember who's in there, but there's 3 or 4 or 5 people that are part of it. Maybe it's time on each of the chapters for the chapter head over the next couple of days, send out a note to the people in their respective groups and set up a Zoom call so that we can start wrapping this up on at least the chapters that have been worked on so far. Just an idea.
No, I like it. And when I send this document that Peter asked for, that I created a year ago, it actually lists each chapter and who the members of that group is. So I think I'll send that to everybody as a reminder. And there might be some names on that list. For example, I have to maybe modify it. Charlie Stott had to drop out and some other folks dropped out.
The document lists the people in my committee right at the very top.
Yeah.
But isn't what Lars just suggested, isn't that pretty much what we were just talking about moving ahead to do? Or am I? Okay. All right, good.
Yeah, I was just, Peter, I don't think the whole group should be getting each chapter. That was all I was saying. Not the whole team, but just the people on each chapter. Let's push that agenda.
Yeah, not my intention.
Those members that are listed for example, chapter 5, they could have the small Zoom without the folks whose name is not on a volunteer for chapter 5.
Right.
And I think that's a good point.
That's correct.
Michael.
Yeah, Michael.
Yeah, that's where I'm coming from. I very much support that. I finally got launched a few days ago and on my work for chapters 2 and 3, land use and housing. And I had agreed to chair both of those, and I've been delinquent, but I finally got on housing the other day. And in fact, what I did was just put up a list of potential bullets, and I sent it out to the members of my group, and then recommended that we have a Zoom to do exactly what we're talking about. Have a Zoom next week, and let's talk about it and refine it a little bit, shape it, and come to agreement on what we should be working on, and if to subdivide the work or not. And then when we've cleaned it up a little bit at least, and talk about formatting, what we think we should be doing, then upload it. And I sent it to Bruce a couple days ago, but he uploaded it as is. And I had actually hoped to, have a Zoom meeting among the 4 or 5 of us just to kick it around for an hour or two and work on it and shape it and get some opinions. But I think that's a productive way to get each piece going, and then kick it up to the group for the larger group.
Okay, Michael, I'll withdraw the file upload and we could.
Oh,
go
no,
from there.
that's okay. I said I don't mind that, but my goal was to try to get it a little
Yeah.
cleaner, a little more focused before we put it up for everyone to kick it around.
Well, you certainly did, and I think I shared the file with the whole group when I sent out the notice of the meeting.
That's okay, but I think I said I'd like to the people I sent it out to, I said I'd love to organize a Zoom sometime later next week for an hour or two for us to bang it around, the 4 or 5 of us. Because there's a huge, as we've all identified, there are so many overlaps in so many of the categories, which is natural, but in particular with land use and housing. And I think in the end of the day, when we have a finished document, there are probably going to be a number of things, number of chapters where there are references in 2 or 3 chapters to the same topic. And then we just have to sort of, as we massage this thing, figure out who takes on what pieces of the puzzle. But I mean, huge numbers of overlap between housing issues and land use issues. So.
Yeah. And I think it's good eventually we can identify those overlaps and put the right component of each issue into the right chapter without putting all the issues into both chapters or multiple chapters.
Right.
So that'll be helpful. Does anybody else have any comments on chapter 5? Well, quickly, I'd like to go to chapter 7, services and facilities. I uploaded 4 files. I've got more, but I haven't gotten to do that yet. So I hope you have a chance to review that. Same situation for Peter. He's at a stopping point until he gets feedback. So it's helpful, even if you just read it and said, I don't have any comments, Peter. That's feedback, and it helps him. What did I do? Did I resume? Hold on. There I am. Computer. So if no one has any comments about that, that's okay. How did I get my hand up? What the hell happened? Thank you. Now, David is not here, so I'm going to skip a discussion about chapter 4, economic development, because he's the chair of that committee. And he did some work on it, and it's uploaded into the Google Drive. And I think at some point in time recently, I may have copied the link to a specific chapter on the Google Drive and sent it out to everyone, where you could just click on the link and go right into the chapter. If you guys find that more helpful than going through opening up Google Drive and finding our file and then going into it and then finding your chapter and then find the document you're looking for, let me know and I'll send everybody a link to each chapter at least, so you don't have to fumble through it much further than that. The next thing I wanted to suggest we talk about was actually the work that Michael was talking about, not necessarily chapter 3, Michael, but chapter 2, land use. Because as you saw in some of the subjects I've mentioned for chapter 5, some of them belong as a topic or a subtopic in land use. And I know Leslie was interested in land use, and many of us have thoughts about how to modify and strengthen the zoning and have a more uniform set of zoning guidelines that apply to the entire Madaket area comprised in the updated zone or boundary for the Madaket area, because the original one that we're sitting with now is barely a couple of streets down in parts of Madaket near Millie's Bridge. So, Michael, you want to go over some of your work with land use and with what you've already done on chapter 3? I think it would be helpful if you just kind of outlined what you've done and give people a chance to perhaps think about it.
Well, I guess my comments would be, number one, Monday is my start day on land use, so I haven't started to put it out down an organization. I've got like 2 folders full of stuff. And land use covers so many areas. One of which is just some of the big ones are redefining the Madaket area. The 2006 plan is very much smaller than what we think it should be. That's a big topic, and I think there's been a lot of work done on that. But that's something that is going to be critical, because we're going to have to make a proposal ultimately to the town and get the town to agree with us on whatever it is. And without getting into the weeds on that now, that's a big one. Another big one in land use is a CRP, Coastal Resilience Plan. There's been a lot of work done on that, a lot of recommendations, and it's extremely relevant, obviously, to us. I think 50 some odd houses in Madaket are in the priority action area in the Coastal Resilience Plan. 140 are at high risk. My numbers may be off, but there are lots and lots, a huge amount of the housing is going to be impacted. And they made recommendations in the plan as to what should or shouldn't happen. I think when we come out of our finished plan, we should be making recommendations to the town as to whether we agree with what we think should be done there. I think the more I've been studying this stuff, I think I'm feeling more strongly that we're going to end up coming out of this with a Madaket area plan, a Madaket area overlay district that will address a whole bunch of issues, some of them in the existing zoning and some of them not. Something that we didn't really go at in the surveys. I think the surveys covered a lot of ground. We got remarkably cohesive responses in some areas, but we really didn't get into in any meaningful way worker housing, and we touched on affordable. I think those are things that are big. Another thing I think that is going to come out of the list is going to be what we want to do in the zoning, is what specifically we can do with zoning to help protect the existing density. Right now, we rely on the Board of Health really to kind of tamp down density in Madaket. If sewer never comes, that'll be wonderful. That'll do a lot of the work for us. But if sewer does come, I think we need to have zoning in place that would give us some of the same protections we're getting with the Board of Health regulations. And there are ways to do that. So I think those are all big topics. But what I'm thinking about doing with our work group, and the most recent one I had for land use, I had Lars, Leslie, me, Bruce, and Emily Molden, which I'm not sure is still relevant. But I mean, that group we could certainly add people to it. But I'm thinking about doing exactly what I did with the housing, which is put together a 2 or 3 pager with most of the bullet points, and then organize a Zoom. Let's have a talk with that small group to think about pruning it, adding and deleting, shaping it a little bit, and a work plan. And then we would shoot that to Bruce to put up for the entire group to talk about.
That's good points, Michael, and it's very complicated. Madaket is the subject of at least 5 overlay districts. And they interpose on each other, and it's very complicated. And it affects the future use of various properties and what people might have happen to them when they decide to sell their property or develop a property.
Well, and land use is also gets complicated in the sense that if we put an overlay district in, a Madaket area overlay with whatever we put into it, and I think it'd probably be relatively comprehensive. There are issues of grandfathering existing properties, both residential and commercial, so that if sewer does come, for example, to change the way things operate, we're protected. If we put in new zoning now, and we don't grandfather, half of the properties, 3/4 of the property in Madaket would probably be non-conforming. So that's okay as long as we agree that they're protected. But what happens, at what point are they no longer grandfathered? When someone modifies the house, when they sell it to someone else? I mean, there are lots of complicated questions we need to address. And I do think that's going to be a principal exercise coming out of what we do and before we make recommendations to the town. But zoning is complicated and it will probably be somewhat contentious because the majority of this group and the voters, when we put a plan out for approval, may feel one way, but there'll be some other people who are violently opposed to some of the changes we recommend. So there's a lot of work ahead of us, I think, but needs to be done.
I want to remind everybody that quite a long time ago, in my frame of reference, we had a meeting with Andrew Vorse, where he gave us some guidelines on how we should develop our area plan. For example, he suggested, and I think almost insisted upon, that anything we do is backed up by surveys of the area residents. And we have conducted 3 or 4 of those kind of surveys. The other thing he said that I think pertains exactly what Michael thinks, he said, if this work group wants to recommend any kind of zoning change, it would be up to the group to develop those, research them, back them up with survey, and present them to the planning department for consideration. He says, but the planning department will not initiate any kind of discussion with the intent of altering the current zoning. So I think we kind of have a license to pursue this. And I would encourage everybody to kick in. Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To you, to Michael. One, I think that the best vehicle for preserving Madaket was the VR zone. Do I think it could use some tweaking? I think that's fine. You've seen some use of that, and I've used that zoning, and I think it's really informative. I think that the problem that you would have as far as making a change, I think if you said, hey, we have, lug 1 and we want to go down to R5, then I think the town in Nantucket's going to have some pushback. You would have some pushback. But I think if you were going to be more restrictive, I think that's an easier thing to sell. 1 to the planning board and 2 at town meeting floor, where everyone really appreciates the VR zone. I think it's working really well in Wisconsin. But as I said, there's tweaks. So I don't think that's going to be a hard sell. The other thing is with Emily, the chairman, Dave Iveson, and myself, and Emily worked on 4181Ls, and it's going before town meeting, and it's 8141Ls, if you guys don't know, it is by right by state, But what we were granting is an undersized lot. You could go up to 1,500 square feet. And we were saying, no, only use the zoning that is allowed. So that now this one property that we looked at, instead of in 1,500 square feet, they're only going to be allowed 700 something square feet. So there's going to be less density as far as that land can be used, but not such a massive house or going from lot line to lot line. So there's a lot of positives. So I think that if we could get moving forward by working on something, I think that you could have it not for this town meeting, but the next, not even a special town meeting, the one after. I think you could have something in place, well crafted, and then go forward. So I don't think that anything you're recommending, Michael, would be something that would be, from my chair or seat on the planning board, would be denied or not looked favorably upon. You're not going to create more land, but at the same time, I think that you can control that density, which is be really wise. And that goes back to your HCC document. You know, if something that nature could be crafted and worked on, that would be helping as well, because that's what the HCC wants. And that's what your voice, our voice, that's what's most important to the HCC, planning board, etc. So I think anything we could do here would be great. So.
Well, I certainly agree. It gets complicated because you got existing zoning. We have to respect that. Your existing property owners, we have to respect their rights. And we have to come to some general agreement as a group as to what are the critical things we want to protect and preserve going forward. What things are we not going to do? And then it's a matter of crafting it. So, but first we have to decide what we want to do, I think, and
Right.
agree. We can't do everything. And if we
Right.
have 25 bullet points, we got to figure out what the priorities are. What are the 5 most important, and so forth and so on. And if you look at the language that the state has in the requirements for housing, the chapter, it breaks it really into 3 pieces. Housing element identifies and analyzes existing and forecasted housing needs, objectives, including programs for preservation, improvement, and development of housing. And each one of those things has different issues associated with it, and we have to be aware of those. So again, I don't want to get into the weeds right now, this meeting, but I think those are the kinds of things we got to tackle. And it's going to be a lot of the stuff we're talking about in housing is going to be embedded in the land use as well. So we just got some work to figure out. But I think that the most complicated ones are going to be workforce housing and affordable. We don't have a lot of land, and we got to figure out how much of that land do we want to try to put away with conservation groups who have indicated interest in working with us on that. How much of it we want to try to design something where we could do workforce housing that would be helpful for the workforce and not gore anybody's ox, existing homeowners, and the same thing with affordable. So it's
and something that came up last night at a planning board meeting was that let's do something tastefully. And so one thing that is being kicked around is this cottage colony development, and it's basically taking the massing of some of the lower cottages of Madaket. So if you're going up Milestone Road, on the left are these small little houses that are very sconset-esque. There's probably 8 of them, and there were once condo, but that's something of that scale. Within that, that's what we're looking to do or hoping to have happen. So I think that there's a lot of that, keeping it low, dense, small, 1-2 bedroom things, I think would really kind of work in the favor of that. But it's working with the neighborhood context and architecture that's already there in that vernacular. And I think that's most important. So how do you, if it is someone's looking at it, how do you get ahead of that? And I think that's what's most important. And that's something that the ACC is trying to work with us, and it's vice versa. And I think that our voice would be critical in sitting at the table, someone sitting at the table, expressing that and fighting for that as well. And going back to 34 and 36 Tennessee Ave as well, how do we get that voice at that table? Which I think we've lost a little bit by losing the advisory committees. So that's my 2 things.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. And, part of what Andrew suggested was you can kind of come up with, for example, a VR designation that was specific for Madaket rather than just for all the communities around the island. And it would be specific for Madaket because Madaket has some different considerations than the other VR communities. So that was one thing. And the other thing, could you amplify this comment you just made? I think that would be helpful, or is it in the minutes of the planning board? Can we look at that? You're muted. Joe, you're muted.
Sorry, I clicked it by accident. It was brought up at the the planning board last night. It is on YouTube. It was toward more the end of the meeting. So that is what I think is stuff we really are working towards, is trying to keep that. You know, and as we've all said, our voice is most important. That's what Andrew was asking for. Leslie's asking for that. We're all asking for that. That will go in, and it's your voice truly counts. And I say yours, but I'm part of that. So I just want to let you know that this is being valued very heavily.
Yeah, I think an overlay district for Madaket is going to be the way to go, where in some cases, for example, if you look at the zoning use plan now, we can't do tiny houses. We can't do work for rental community. We can do workforce housing. We can't do apartments. But I think if we come up with a plan to say, you know, just for Madaket, we're not forcing this on anyone else, but given the way we're built today and the number of houses we have and so forth, we want to do this, and this. And we're not looking to take away lug zones or VR, but to the extent we want to, with regard to workforce housing or with regard to affordable housing, we want there to be carve-out exceptions where in this district we could do tiny houses or we could do duplexes, which we can't do now. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
Yeah,
It's to accomplish a goal for
right.
us, and not bother anybody else.
Yeah, so if the cottage colony article gets approved at the town meeting, it would be a special permit. It would go before the planning board. The massing, the density, the access, all that comes into it. You know, what's his name? Stephen Murray, it just came up last night, and he's trying to do a development where it's lug 2 and he's trying to go down to or 20 down to trying to go down zoning. And we have a little bit of a problem with that. But at the same time, he's trying to do 40 1 to 2 bedroom houses, single story, and he's trying to do that. But we feel like the density is too much. So it's a balance you're trying to work with without overbearing a neighborhood. And I feel like where he's trying to do it is over a little bit too much. That's my opinion. But that's where I think when you see this article and it starts to get distributed, I think you all should weigh in, read it. How would this work in Madaket? How does it not work in Madaket? And maybe have something prepared so when it does come before the planning board, that someone does make an application within the Madaket VR zone, new VR zone, then you're prepared with some of the comments. And back to your point, for the VR zone, well, what are the issues? What are little tweaks we should make? We've had it for X amount of years. Well, this was a problem and that was a problem, and they make those adjustments, and you could make minor adjustments to the VR zone or that overlay. And I think that's something very easily to do for the next town meeting.
Yeah. Joe, is there a rough draft of this article or ideas about what it might be? So
yeah, I'll ask Megan Trudell has it, and I'll ask her if town council is looking at it. And if it's past town council, then I'll have her share it with you, and you can share it with the group. But again, like I said, it is a special permit. It's not by right. Someone's not just going to come into Madaket and just say, I'm going to do this. And then of course all the butters will be notified, but you know, the communication in Madaket is very good. So I think you'd get a very good, quick sense of what it is. But right now it is mainly single story, nothing over 22, 23 feet, very low, very low massing, more on the first floor than anything on the second floor. So.
Okay. We're kind of running out of time, so I'd like to know if anybody has any further comments on this item of discussion and how we kind of leaked into some other sidebars for the land use and the other chapter Michael's working on, the important. I think these are very, anyway, does anybody have any more comments on those?
Joe, just a clarification for me as well as for the minutes. This idea of an overlay for Madaket, is that, have you had a comment? I couldn't hear when you started out. Did you have a comment about that it would not be a good idea or could be a good idea?
No, I think it's a very good idea. And I think that the VR zone is a great, I did a project in M Street. And I thought the 25-foot high cap worked really well. I think if my clients could have got more ground cover, I don't think we would have gone up for so much second floor massing, and that's a balance we kind of work on. But I feel like if there are some things that you're noticing with the HCC for the VR zone, capping the height, etc., then let's address them. And if it's a tweak here or there, I think that would be very simply passed through town meeting. So I think creating that zone, which we already have a zone, but I think redefining that, finding out what is not worked well or what we thought was intended to make those tweaks. And then get like what we're all talking about. What happens if the sewer does come in place? And I think, that would be probably 1 to 2 years before we know it's definitely coming. But I think if we had a document prepared, town looked at it, planning department looked at it, town council's weighed in on it, then the moment that sewer is coming, you could either have a document ready or have something already in place in anticipation of that.
Now,
So.
Madaket is more than VR. There's a lot
Yes.
of LUG
There is.
1 and 2,
Right.
not so much 2, but 3. So, and
But-
is this cottage colony idea just for VR or for any zone?
Any zone, my goal would be to keep it out of the core. I'm gonna say basically from the hospital to Hopeless Road access, trying to keep it out of that. That's what I would like to see. I feel like it should be outlined. I think this is too much density within the core. But it all goes back to that Monomoy or Milestone Road little project. There's 6 houses across from the high school that are very small, 1-bedroom places that work really well. And it's, there's some people that are just looking for 1 to 2-bedroom places. And how do we do that tastefully? I think that Madaket kind of has that. If you go, by Millie's, there's a lot of little cottages that work really well. I think people just want a little bit of backyard. They don't want to be on top of each other. I think that there's other projects that are just too dense, and it's how do you work that balance? So, and I think that we've done that, but I think there's more tweaking to do.
Madaket that would apply to this concept, just thinking Smith Point is kind of that nature of the development. But one thing I think you guys may want to think about was an idea that Michael and I have shared a couple of times sitting on the deck watching the sunset.
The
is how
cigars,
you
though.
deal with this. It could be that existing properties might be grandfathered until the time they are transferred out of that or a family chain. If they sell to someone new, if they decide to change ownership form or something like that, they would fall into the new Madaket zone. And eventually, probably a very long time, this would take hold. That's just one concept of how to get people to think about we're not trying to take away some of their rights that they bought their property for.
Yeah, and I think that, to you, Mr. Chair, to Leslie, but I think the VR zone works really well, but lug 1, they are by right, they could go to 30 feet. So maybe there's a lug 1 Madaket zone or lug 2.
No, they can't go to 30 feet because we have an overlay district, a height overlay district that includes.
Right, but you were just saying the VR zone, but there's other things. So I'm just saying, like, this is where you make sure that everything's kind of covered, you cap the height, you kind of work on all these areas. And that the HUC knows that, because there are people that have gone in And it wasn't until they got the building department did they realize, oh, that's the VR zone, so they had to go back to the ACC. So, but if that got by, that would be kind of problematic, you know.
Yeah,
But
Yes.
again, a zoning goal would be if we can all come to agreement on the boundaries of the Madaket area.
yeah,
Ultimately is in a simple world would be a new overlay zone, zoning regs that maybe take away some of the things that are there now, so there's not conflicts between log 1 and log 2 in this or
Right.
that. And, try to consolidate a little bit so that you've got a set of rules that work for everybody, regardless of where you are in the zone. With some exceptions, obviously. We wouldn't have to take away VR, but if the new zone incorporated the same height that we have with VHOD goes away. I mean,
Right.
it could be simplifying as well as consolidating. But, the devil's in the details, and we're not going to work that out today, but that's what's ahead of us.
Yes.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're running up against our 1 hour time limit, and I wanted to find out if anybody has some new business they'd like to lay on the table for us to consider. I don't see any volunteers. The only thing I learned was more and more is that getting an approval from Board of Health, HDC, Concom, and any other entity that has some influence or some input is kind of a mishmash of directions. There's no uniform. Go to Board of Health first, then go to Concom, seek any variances you need, then go to HDC to have the way the house looks reviewed. Because a decision by one of these entities could affect something that's already approved by a prior entity.
correct.
So I'm wondering if you can think about any ideas on how to streamline and make that process more uniform.
To use an
Within the
analogy a
Madaket
friend
area plan?
used.
Say again, Joe?
Sorry,
No, go ahead, Ethan. Go ahead.
Bruce, you're wondering if we should do that within the Madaket area plan?
I don't see why it couldn't be, because it's part of the process we have to live with. And if it's not being addressed anywhere else, when it comes to the zoning chapter or part of the zoning chapter, why can't we address it there?
So the comment that came up to me when I was first in getting started 38 years ago in HDC, et cetera, was the analogy, you go ask the parent that's going to say yes. So if you you go to the ACC first, or you go to and it was like at the ZBA last night, it was oh well what approvals else you need? No, we've had Concom, we've had HCC approval, and all of a sudden you see the ZBA like, okay. And so there's just which cart before the horse. So that's what kind of gets worked on and stuff like that. Not that there's a huge change, and not to say the ZBA says you can't do that, go back to the other boards. That does happen quite routinely, but that was the term that I was told when I first got started.
Yeah, I get the point. This Tennessee Avenue thing, the sewer department gave them permission to put 2 septic systems on 1 lot. And therefore we can't build on that lot. Then they go to Concom and say, well, we have to build and get all these variances to violate, because we're violating the 100-foot no build, we're violating the Colony Coastal Project, and their excuses, well, the health already approved the location of the septic system, and that's the only place where we could have put the house without needing all these variances.
Right.
So it's complicated, and it affects how Madaket looks. It affects coastal resilience, as Michael said, because in this example, they're building right on the coastal resilience boundary and into the floodplain. So it's a complicated issue, and if you're not into it, it's hard to comprehend. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to mention before we seek an adjournment? No. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today, because the last two sessions had to be abandoned because lack of a quorum, and I know it's a pain in the ass on a Friday afternoon, but I think it's important that at least you check in for when we've start the meetings. I appreciate it very much. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Leslie. Anybody second?
Second.
Michael seconds. Anyone opposed to an adjournment? Unanimous then that this is time to adjourn. Thank you all for attending. Be careful how you wave your hand, JP. Joe, thank you for hosting.
No problem.
Thank you, Joe.
Well done, Bruce.
Thanks, guys.
Good weekend.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Nice to
Thanks,
see you,
everybody.
Ethan.
Yeah, nice seeing you too.
Very nice to see him. I am so glad that he tuned in.
Very happy to be here. Nice to see
Thank
you.
you, Tom.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Tom too. Tom too.
Yeah, have a good evening.
Such a happy group. Alrighty, bye.
Okay.